The Italian Radio Hour is sponsored by Istituto Mondo Italiano.
Buonasera a tutti, good evening and welcome to the Italian Radio Hour. Io sono Viviana.
E io sono Caterina. Welcome back to our regular listeners, and we also welcome any new listeners and anyone listening online at khbradio.com. Also, be sure to like us on Instagram and Facebook on the Italian Radio Hour and subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch up on any past episodes.
E io vorrei dare il benvenuto ai nostri ascoltatori da tutto il mondo. Grazie per essere con noi anche oggi mentre continuiamo il nostro viaggio per l'Italia e la cultura italiana.
Well, last week we had an interesting conversation with two guests. Our first guest was the noted chef Christina Bauerman. She's the chef at Glass Osteria in the Trastevere neighborhood in Rome, and she's the only female chef in Rome who's been awarded a Michelin star. We discussed her path in becoming a chef and her philosophy of sustainable gastronomy. In the second part of the program, we learned about the sinking of the Andrea Doria, the luxury liner that sank on July 25th, 1956, when it was struck by the Swedish ship Stockholm. And our guest was Pierrette Simpson, who was a survivor of the disaster. On tonight's program, we have an interesting topic. We'll be discussing the importance of the family vegetable garden in the Italian tradition. Instead of our usual two-guest format, we will be talking to four individuals about their own personal experiences of maintaining a vegetable garden and its importance to them in the Italian tradition and in the Italian-American identity. In the first half of the show, we'll speak with Mary Meniti, founder of the Italian Garden Project, and Rosetta Costantino, author of the cookbooks My Calabria and Southern Italian Desserts, who has an extensive Calabrese-style garden. And later in the second half, we'll be speaking with Michaela Smith, the director of the short documentary film Heirloom, and her mother, Sandy Grasso, also known as Zia Beda in the Garden on the Instagram site. The film focuses on a mother and daughter who set out to discover why Italian Americans love to garden. But before we get to our guests tonight, let's find out the answer to last week's trivia question. Viviana, what is the meaning of come il cacio sui maccheroni?
Well, come il cacio sui maccheroni, or maybe I should say come il cacio sui maccheroni in Roman dialect, is an expression that we use daily to define a perfect pairing of elements in a situation. So not necessarily an expression related to food. Now, the expression was indeed born about over 1,000 years ago in the first period of the Middle Ages, where pasta and specifically macaroni started to be dressed with a shaving of formaggio, of cheese. And so that was indeed an improvement on how people started to enjoy their pasta. And the expression came all the way up to us in the different recipes. And a very famous recipe in the Roman cuisine is indeed cacio e pepe, where cacio stands for cheese. So this is it, and it's a very common expression used among the Romans.
And cacio e pepe is my favorite kind of pasta, I have to say.
But before we get to our guests, here is a little bit of pubblicità. Parli italiano? Do you want to learn, improve, or master your Italian? Istituto Mondo Italiano can help. Located in the heart of Regent Square, Mondo Italiano offers small group classes and one-on-one private tutoring to help you learn Italian in no time. Visit us online at www.istitutomondoitaliano.org. Well, welcome back, everyone. I am very, very pleased to introduce our first two guests, two very knowledgeable resources on Italian vegetable gardens. Mary Meniti, growing up with an Italian immigrant grandfather, Mary came to know and value his self-reliant lifestyle, his careful use of resources, and his extensive gardening knowledge. She founded the Italian Garden Project to preserve old world food and gardening traditions and demonstrate that the wisdom of Italian American gardeners possesses is relevant for addressing some of the most pressing challenges of today. And Mary travels around the country documenting the last remaining classic Italian American vegetable gardens, learning from their creators and serving as the caretaker for their heirloom seeds and fig trees. And her website, www.theitaliangardenproject.com, provides a window into this way of life through blogs, photo galleries, and videos featuring old-school gardening know-how, traditions, recipes, memories, and more. Rosetta Costantino, born and raised in Verbicano, a small hill town in Calabria. She and her parents immigrated to the United States when she was 14 years old. In Calabria, her father was a farmer, master cheesemaker, and winemaker, living almost entirely off the land. After they moved to the San Francisco Bay Area, they continued to grow their own produce, making their own fresh ricotta, and maintaining the cooking and farming traditions of the region. After a successful 20 years career as a chemical engineer in the Silicon Valley, Rosetta retired from the hectic lifestyle and sought to celebrate her Calabrian heritage, offering cooking classes at her home, authoring 2 cookbooks on Calabrian cooking and Southern Italian desserts, and heading culinary immersion tours in Calabria, Sicily, and Puglia. She has an extensive vegetable garden herself that she shares on Instagram. Benvenute al nostro programma. Welcome, ladies, to our program. How are you?
Thank you, Viviana. So glad to join you all today.
Wonderful. And Rosetta, are you with us?
Yes. Thank
okay.
you.
Wonderful.
Thanks for having me. Yes, I just got back from Italy. So.
Yes. And actually, Kathy was on one of your tours, and we'll get to that. And we will ask questions pretty much in parallel to both of you during the episode. So, Mary, let's start with you. Share with our listeners, please, a little bit about your family background, where you came from in Italy, and when they came to the U.S. and where they settled.
Okay, yeah, my grandfather, all of my grandparents were Italian immigrants. My maternal side was from northern Italy in a little town called Masio in the province of Alessandria in Piemonte. And my paternal side, my grandmother's family was from Agnone in Molise, and my paternal grandfather was from Sant'Angelo d'Alife in Campania in the province of Caserta. And my paternal grandfather was, although all my grandparents gardened, even my mother's side, but it was really my paternal grandfather who the project is based on, because he was at our house every day gardening as I was growing up, and he came he came to this country in 1912 at the age of 16, and lived the typical immigrant lifestyle.
Can you talk, my mom?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so Mary, I met Mary back on, I actually double-checked, thank you, Facebook for that, or Meta, September 10th, 2011. I think it was a Penguins bookstore in Sewickley, where there was actually a book launch by a student of mine, Meredith Coyne, and then you were right after, and I remember I was almost leaving, and then I see this fig tree, and then I see pictures, I just had to sit down again and find out who this lady was that had documented some of the gardens in Sewickley. And we'll get to the Italian Garden Project in just one second. Rosetta, so you came with your family straight from Calabria. Was it an invitation from a relative, or how did your family decide to move from Calabria to the U.S.?
My mom's brothers, they both were here. They immigrated in the 60s. And so they used to come over and visit, during the summer months. And my parents, of course, lived off the land and worked all the time. And they, over many years, they finally convinced them to leave it behind. They kept on telling them, you guys work too hard, just come over, be better opportunities for Rosetta. You guys should try it. So they eventually packed up everything, and they said, let's give it a try. If we don't like it, we'll come back. So that was 1974, and we ended up staying. We loved, the Bay Area. I mean, what's not to love? California, the weather, very similar. So we stayed. We never went back. Of course, we go back. We went back for vacation, but we never went back to live there. So we've been here since '74.
Mary, what exactly is the Italian Garden Project, and why did you start it?
Well, the Italian Garden Project, our mission is about celebrating the Italian-American backyard vegetable garden as an important part of our cultural identity. You know, most of our ancestors came from this way of life, a way of life like Rosetta's parents, closely connected to the earth, surviving on what they could grow, using resources wisely. And when they brought this knowledge, when they left, they brought this knowledge with them and recreated lifestyles here centered around the garden. So now remembering those gardens is an important way of honoring our ancestors and who they were, but also recognizing that their lifestyle is relevant for today. The kind of knowledge and wisdom and the way they lived close to the earth and lightly on the earth is relevant for knowing today and the future, almost more important than ever.
Rosetta, I read an article online that when you all moved to the States, your father, he didn't believe in flower gardens, ornamental gardens, and that he basically ripped out all your flowers. Can you tell us about that? And what did he cultivate?
My dad's attitude was, if you can't eat it, it's a waste of time. So our backyard, he removed everything when, we first moved and we bought, the first house of my parents. And he did the same thing when I bought my house. Because to him, it was like it's a waste of time and money to, you're paying water to water them, and you can't eat them. He just always says, if you can't eat them, it doesn't belong there. So the only place he allowed flowers was in the front of the house. So my mom was allowed to have her flowers in the front of the house, but everything in the backyard had to be edible. And even mine today, it's 100% edible, the backyard, which is where I have all the vegetables.
And this is quite interesting because in preparation of the show, we actually came full loop because I knew Mary, Kathy knew Rosetta, and we didn't know that you knew one another because Mary had documented your parents' garden. And so this question is a little bit for both of you on Mary's side as well and Rosetta. What have you noticed by documenting so many gardens about the approach, the Italian approach to gardening? It might be unique and different compared to the American approach of gardening?
I can go first. Rosetta, I'm sure she understands fully the answer to this as well. But when someone has come from a lifestyle based around the garden, a lifestyle where you survive on what you could grow, it just instills a different mentality, a different way to look at the garden. The garden is just part of your life. You couldn't imagine being without a garden, and it would seem foolish and dangerous to not know how to garden, because it's just like my grandfather, instilled in me that, something as essential as your food, not to know how to produce that, not to be able to have access to it, to growing it and to having it available is just foolish. So it's a completely different mindset when it comes to gardens as a way of life, as opposed to, most of us in America garden as a hobby, which is a very different approach.
I would have to agree with Mary 100%. It's just part of life. I don't know how else to describe it. It's like for me not to have, whether it might be just some parsley or basil right there anytime I need it, to have to think I would have to go to the store, to go buy it. It's just beyond me. It's like, it's part of me. It's like an extension of me, just to be able to go outside and have the food, whatever, I need, or whatever it's growing and cooking it. I don't know how else to describe it other than it's part of my life.
And I would also add the the flavor, because for instance, in my own little experience, and I come from the city in Rome, we do have a vacation home where we do have a fig tree that has seen now 3 generations and a few other fruit trees, but we never really had a vegetable garden. And when I came here just a few years ago, I started to grow my own food because sometimes when you get, let's say, tomatoes, when they're not in season, they're tasteless and they're still very expensive. Yep. So it kind of, it's not that I cannot afford to get those tomatoes, but it just is not worth it.
It's exactly the point. I mean, money is definitely not an issue. I can't buy it. I cannot buy what I grow. Even if you give me the very best beans, and I know we have, very good beans companies here in California that people say, they're the best, and I have bought it, the Berlotti beans. They just don't compare, and they don't taste like mine, and they don't cook like mine. So once you're used to that, it's very hard to let go. To say, I'm just not going to grow any vegetables. I'll just go to the farmer's market. I mean, and in California, we have amazing produce. It's not, that I can complain. But there's still a difference. My green beans, my Romano beans, taste totally different and cook totally different than what the farmer's market has. And whether it's because I'm picking them and cooking them within an hour or it's just the varietal that we grow, but they're different. And to me, that's worth millions of dollars.
So do you think it's the seeds? Is it the seeds that your parents brought with them from Calabria, or is it the love you put into growing?
I think a lot.
Or both.
A lot of it has to do with the varietal. Yes, it's the seeds, the specific ones that we grow. Yeah, probably if I could get other people to grow the same identical seeds that we grow. They would probably, be very similar, I would have to say.
And then as far as this again, a question that both of you can answer. Do you find that I personally was very grateful when I, last year, a friend of mine, an old Italian farmer from Calabria, in those orange medicine, plastic medicine containers.
prescription bottles. Yeah.
Okay, prescription bottles, sorry. And gave me the seeds of the peppers that he was growing, that he had brought from Calabria. So I felt I was in the circle. So do you find that people trading seeds, they kind of, have you experienced that?
Well, yes. I mean, seeds are an important part of my project that as we go around documenting these gardens across the country, it's important to collect these seeds that have come decades ago, sometimes a century ago, because I've found that as these gardeners age and are no longer planting these gardens, sometimes these seeds just disappear. And so I have gratefully become the caretaker of so many of these seeds across the country. And it's just, they're heirlooms. These are the heirlooms of our culture. And they are as priceless as, fine china or fine furniture or anything that could be passed down, the seeds and the fig trees that were brought over. So, yeah, it is, and it is a joy to be, like you said, Viviana, to be given those seeds. You feel honored that they're sharing such a important part of their life, their history, their connection to the past with you. So, yeah, so these seeds and collecting them is, we have what's called a legacy seed collection with seeds, over 55 varieties of seeds brought from Italy and safeguarded through the project.
And where are those seeds?
Is it like a seed? Is it like a seed bank?
Is it a seed bank?
It is. Yes, we've cataloged them, and we've have a seed preservation network. We've shared them with growers throughout the country, and now we're working with Growers Grange, a farm in outside of Portland, Oregon, to safeguard and regrow these seeds for us. So yeah, it is. It's vital because losing these seeds is heartbreaking because these are such an important part of our culture, and the fig trees. The fig trees that have been brought over and grown in Brooklyn and all over the country in Baltimore. They represent who our ancestors were. And I also have the Legacy Fig Tree Collection, for which I recently got a grant to formalize that collection and add to it.
Yeah, I know having a fig tree is a big thing for Italian Americans. And in fact, we just got our first fig tree last year. Of course, living in Pennsylvania, the fig tree spends its winter in the garage. I don't dig a trench to put the fig tree in. And we actually have some baby figs. This morning I counted probably about 25 figs on it. So maybe October I might get a fig. But what is it about figs? Rosetta, I know you love figs.
I love figs too.
We all love figs. What is it about figs and Italians? Can both of you explain to me what is this thing about figs?
I don't know. I think, growing up around them, and again, it's just part of your life. It's like, to my parents, or even to my grandparents, they were, when I think about what they used them for, they were fuel in a way, because they would sun dry, all the figs. They had many, many hundreds of fig trees. And my mom tells me about it that, they would have these huge, containers that they would save and preserve them for the winter months. And those were like their candies. But it was actually more than a candy. It's like, it was fuel. I mean, they would just, hand them 4 or 5 of those and a slice of bread, and they were okay, to start the morning or start working. But I think it's because they're there. They planted them everywhere. I think all of southern Italy, but especially Calabria, is loaded with figs. And, we're fortunate to have the Fico dotato, which is one of the best figs. And those are perfect also for sun drying. So when we moved here, it was the same thing. It's like, we need to get those figs. We need to find them. And that's what they do. Italians share. We talked about sharing seeds. And that's how we ended up with getting, fig trees from other friends who already had them here.
And
but it was a very specific variety that grows in Calabria that we wanted to have. There are many, of course, there are hundreds of varieties, but the Fico dotato is here they call it a cadota fig. But it's probably one of the best figs as far as I'm concerned, because I'm used to it.
And then Mary also had a beautiful, there was a fig fest that you have organized in Pittsburgh, and that was definitely, the fig festival was a beautiful event. It was a way also of people acquiring some of your figs. I don't know if there are cuttings still from some of your regional trees. And I hope at some point you will consider organizing another one.
Yes. I love Fig Fest, and you participated, and were a great part of it. And it's a way to celebrate this tradition. You said, what is it about the fig? And Rosetta's right. Figs were food. Sometimes, I've heard stories where figs were, after the war, sometimes all a family had to eat was a dried fig, maybe with an almond in it. My friend Michele told me these stories. So you had the fig tree that could feed you in the summer, dried, it could feed you through the winter. I think so when the immigrants came, they wanted to be self-reliant. They didn't want to depend on anyone else. They knew how vital, they knew what food security was. So the fig tree not only represented the flavors of home, but it also represented food and food security. So I think that's why figs, that's why they were so, the immigrants planted them so predominantly across the country. But I also think the fig tree is important for especially the children and grandchildren of the immigrants, because we remember, and especially on the East Coast, Rosetta, you're too lucky to have to do this bizarre ritual with a tree. But in the East, on the East, in the Northeast, we have to protect them for the winter. And our ancestors came up with lots of ingenious ways to do that, including actually burying them under the ground. So many of us who have that immigrant grandparent or uncle that, loved their fig tree so much that they, went to such great lengths to protect it through the winter, we sort of identify we remember that very nostalgically. And so I actually teach classes on because from two people who want to know how to do what they've heard their grandfather did, or they remember their grandfather did, about how to protect those fig trees through the winter in very cold climates. So I think there's lots of reasons people love fig trees.
There is something that I think it's a common element of whether East Coast or West Coast, but the Italian gardeners always showed a great ingenuity, as you were just talking about the fig tree. Rosetta, in the way that your parents did their gardening, do you have any example of something that was not specifically a gardening tool that they came up with to use, I don't know, to tie the tomato plants or something else that, because I'm sure there is also, you don't toss anything because you might just need it tomorrow or you might just need it for something else. So any clever...
Yeah.
I have a lovely pictures of Rosetta's dad's seed poker, to poke the seed to make the hole in the ground. He was made with a grapevine.
I kept that. But, the garden really, they didn't buy anything at all. I mean, the only thing we pay for in California was the water because, we didn't have a well or anything else. So that was the only thing. But everything else was pretty much for free or recycled or reclaimed. It's like, we would get the manure for free because that's all we put in our soil, tons of manure. All the poles, that we used or post, whatever, for tying, whether it was for the tomatoes, for the beans, it was all trimmings of trees or recycled, wood that he had. And the tomatoes, as Mary has seen, they would just use rags, old shirts, and make rags. And we still do it that way. It's funny because I just came back from Italy, and my cousin says, "I don't believe it. You're still using shirt rags, are you?" He says, "We don't. We use this tape now that we buy it at the nursery. It's really easy to use. You should think about switching." And I said, "Oh no!" I said, "We got plenty of old shirts. We're not getting rid of our rags." But everything. I mean, it was just, again, it wasn't because they didn't have the money that they couldn't buy the stakes, the poles or things like that. It was just the way they were used to it. They grew up with using whatever Mother Nature gave them.
Yes, I remember you telling us that your dad would use, was it the Spanish broom, the stems, to make the baskets for the ricotta. Right?
Yeah. I mean, all of those were woven by hand, the baskets for the ricotta, and even the baskets and the trays. I mean, a lot of the trays that they used to dry, whether it's sun-drying tomatoes or the figs or whatever they were drying, they were made out of that bamboo. It's a bamboo reed that grows wild, all over Calabria. It grows even here in California. And they would just split that bamboo and they would weave it to make trays. Even today, you can still find them if you go in small towns in Calabria. People are still doing that. But they had that mentality to use what Mother Nature gave you and to recycle things. And whether it was because, they went through World War II, they grew up during that time, or whether it was just the way they were brought up, I mean, here they kept them. They kept the same tradition. And I still keep them today. And as I said, it's not that I don't have the money. It's their traditions, and they make sense. It's like, we talk about being green and being, and recycling. It's like, well, they've been doing it all along, and they've been organic all along. Because that was a way of life. There was really nothing else. All they had was manure to put in the soil, and they sort of kept the same traditions.
I have a last question. Unfortunately, we're sort of coming to the end of this portion of the show, but I have a last question for both of you. Can you give us a short list of musts that I should put into my Italian garden?
Whatever is in your Italian cooking.
Okay.
I mean, what's your favorite dishes, and of course, all the classics. Rosetta, is the expert chef with tomatoes and peppers and garlic and all the classics.
Yeah.
I would recommend.
Yeah, I tend to grow things, as I said, that I really can't buy, and a lot of it, it's also all varietal, but because I'm limited with space, I don't have a lot of space. So things that are easier to find, or I can get them at the farmer's market, I don't grow. Like I would like to grow, let's say, fennel, right? I love fennel, but I just don't have the space. And I love my bitter greens, all the different types of chicory, escarole that we have. I'd rather grow those than grow the fennel because I know I can buy fennel, But I grow our San Marzano tomato, and or Romano beans, or eggplants, or sweet peppers, or hot peppers, or Berlocchi beans. Of course, I grow zucchini, even though you can buy zucchini here. I always have my lettuce bed, so I always have fresh lettuce. And I grow my sweet red onions of Tropea. Those are always in my garden, too.
Of course.
And then lots of herbs. But the minimum, I would say, make sure you have fresh herbs. At least you don't have to run to the store to buy fresh herbs.
Well, ladies,
so that's what I would tell you.
Ladies, this has been such an insightful and pleasant conversation, and we will follow up also with some links to both of your websites, cookbooks and tours, and we hope to have you again to see what's cooking in your future plans. So I would like to thank you both, and we will be in touch. Grazie a entrambe.
Grazie.
Thank you. Thank you for having
us.
Well,
okay. Bye.
Bye-bye. Before moving to the second portion of the program, let's pause for a brief commercial break. Applying for dual citizenship? Need documents translated? Istituto Mondo Italiano provides certified translation and interpretation services in 20 different languages. Be sure to visit us at www.istitutomondoitaliano.org. So we are very happy to have this mom and daughter team joining us, Michela Maria Smith and Sandy Grasso, to present their latest project, Heirloom, a short documentary about Sandy's and Michela's own quest to discover why Italian Americans still love to garden. The film has been featured at numerous film festivals, including the Arizona International Film Festival, New Jersey's Golden Door International Film Festival, and its premiere at the Los Angeles Italian Film Festival. It will be its first showing in Italy this summer at the Andaras Film Festival in Sardinia. The film was produced by Noi Aft founder Taylor Taglianetti. Buonasera. Welcome, Michela and Sandy.
Buonasera. Thank you so much for having us.
Oh, the pleasure, it's all ours. And Sandy, if at some point I call you Zia Bedda, it's your fault because that's your Instagram handle.
I'm okay with that.
So let's start a little bit about from you, Sandy. Can you share a little bit where your family originally came from and why and when they immigrated to the U.S.?
Yes, my dad was born in a small town just outside of Catania in Sicily. And my mother's parents, and he came, I guess it was 49, so post-World War II. And he met my mother, who was in Italy just after the war, and her parents were also from a different small town, not far from Catania. So all within the region, Provincia di Catania.
Wonderful.
Yeah, same province my mother came from. And actually, ironically, she came to the States in 1949 from the Provincia Catania. So quite a coincidence.
Oh, wow.
Well, I have to figure out those ship records.
She came on a plane. Oh, she came on.
Okay.
So, I was wondering, Michela, what inspired you to create the film?
Well, it was really my mother. I can't lie. I mean, we got this wonderful grant. The Russo brothers, who famously have made the Avengers films, they've collaborated with NIAF and with ISDA to create a scholarship program to give out grants to filmmakers to make films about Italian-American subjects. And when we got the grant, my mom looked at me and said, okay, so we're making a film about gardens. So there really wasn't much discussion to be had there. Of course, there had been a whole application process where we had intimated that that's what we were going to make the film about. But really, it was the obvious answer because we had always had this tradition in my family of people having big gardens during the summer, and that was one of the main summer activities. It wasn't going to the beach every weekend. It was going out and digging in the manure. And so it made sense that that's something that we would focus on. And for me, being second generation, it was really a question of why does my family do this? I know I can go to Whole Foods and buy a great tomato. Why are we toiling away in 90-degree heat to be, picking also good tomatoes? So it really was an investigation for me to better understand my family and this obsession they have with gardening.
Sandy, do you have memories about growing up with a garden, whether it was your father, your grandfather?
Always. My parents gardened together, and they always had a huge garden. So it was never a question whether I would garden. It was just, we're going to go out in the garden. So we're going to pick some tomatoes. We're going to plant some tomatoes. I heard Mary, I believe, talking about the fig tree. We had 3 fig trees. It was just a fixture in my life. And, as I say in the film, and I know you saw the film, I never thought of it as work. It was just sheer joy.
Well, after you left your family home, did you have a garden? Because I watched the film and it seemed like you were just starting that garden.
It was a playground.
Yeah, it was.
There used to be a playground.
It used to be where the playground set used to be.
We've always had a garden, and when you watch the film, in the long shot, you can see there's a garden off to the side.
Oh, okay.
So this is a much bigger garden and a good use of what formerly was the playground. So, and actually it's much closer to the house than my other garden is. So it was an improvement.
Michaela,
but it was also about...
Yes. Go ahead, sorry.
I didn't say it was also about trying to, have a renaissance to return to the type of gardening that my mom's parents had made such a big part of their lives. My mom was able to keep it up, but certainly when we were little, that was a much harder responsibility, to be tending a huge garden. So a big impetus for the film and for the new garden that she now has was to return to that level and quantity of gardening.
Mm-hmm.
True.
Michaela, still for you, in the documentary, you interviewed several experts on the Italian-American identity. How did you find them? And maybe did they all have the same position? Did you find different positions or different information based on who you were interviewing?
Yeah, we definitely did, which is both interesting and frustrating as a documentarian, it's because you're trying to kind of try to solidify a specific thesis and people have lots of different thoughts. Of course, everyone agreed that gardening is essential to the Italian and to the Italian-American identity. But where people started to diverge was the reasoning behind that, which was the, question that I was really after. Some folks thought of it as being a way to keep past generations in the presence of mind and continue on with traditions that their ancestors had started. Some people saw gardening as something that's really in the Italian DNA, and we can't help it because it's a form of conviviality. It's a form of being together, just like, cooking together or eating together can be. It's just another iteration of that, and it's not really about gardening. So everyone had different theories on the why, but everyone agreed on the what, which is the Italian obsession with gardening.
In watching the documentary, I was fascinated that you found Isabella Rossellini in the States. I didn't know she was living in the States, and that she even has her own garden. And also her reasons for having the garden. Can you tell us how you found her and what you learned from her?
Sure. So I was living in New York at the time, and she was a friend of a friend. And we discovered that we didn't know either, that she has this massive farm on Long Island that she helps operate. She owns it, but the operation, the day-to-day, is run by her daughter, Electra. And to that point, the farm is now called Mama's Farm because Isabella was the spirit behind starting it. And they do everything from vegetables that we would recognize to raising chickens. They have a farm share program so that other folks on Long Island can come in and take part in the bounty of the farm. They have Sunday evening dinners a couple of times a summer, or at least pre-COVID they did. So they do a lot of really interesting things there. But all of it seems in service of Isabella's thesis, which she shared with us in the film, which is having a garden is about being together. It is something that you can do together as a family. It is a literal place where the family can gather and be amongst their bounty. And there's something that ties them together more tightly than any other sort of environment could, because it's something that not only you enjoy together, but you built together. And for her, there's something inherently Italian about that.
There was one of your guests, I think it was Professor Frank Grandafe from the Italian American Studies, and one of the points that he makes, in addition to define probably the garden as a place in the mind, because whether we can connect or romanticize about this link, but it kind of made a good point where every Italian American should find a way to go back to their family and homeland, just to visit, go around, walk, and so forth. So obviously you took that advice to the T, and before you know, you are on the plane. Both are from Michaela's perspective as Sandy's. Can you tell us, maybe Michaela, when was the last time that you were in Italy? And Sandy, how different did you feel this time to go back to Italy with this project in mind?
Yeah, so up to that point, so that trip we took was right before COVID, so it was 2019 that we went and we filmed there. Before that, I had done a brief trip to Italy in 2012, so it had been, around 7 years prior. But I hadn't seen my family on that trip. So the last time that I had gone to my family's hometown was the only time prior to that, which was 2006. So it had been quite a chunk of time. We had seen them; they'd come to the States in the interim, but it had been quite a while since I had been home there. And then my mom.
I had actually been there in 2016, and actually the summer of my 17th birthday, I spent the whole summer there. So that family is, much closer than, your average cousin, I would say. And it's very funny. I could be exchanging WhatsApp messages with any one of them in the morning on my train commute to Boston. And they're making lunch at that time. And just that it's not we don't have extended conversations, but just that connection is so important to me. And, I was delighted to bring my children there. And, of course, Michaela, this trip to do some filming in my dad's hometown.
When you returned to your parents' hometown in Sicily, you discovered that they had farmland on the slopes of Mount Etna, which it seems like you didn't know that before. What were your impressions of discovering this, and also your impressions of the property and the connection to the land?
Well, the land was what. Go ahead, Michaela.
You can go ahead. No, you can go ahead.
Oh, no, the land would actually belong to my grandfather, my nonno, and as you would say, in Sicily. And I had kind of been aware of it, but not aware of it. It is a long way from even the small town that my cousins were in. And it's just, I've seen pictures of my dad in that little house where there's an orchard right there where they would go to pick the fruit and tend the trees. Excuse me. And you just really kind of got a sense, it kind of brought me a little bit closer to what it was really like for my dad. And my cousins still go. And they still tend the trees, and they just have, little barbecues up there and go up for a Sunday just to get out of the heat of Cadania. So it's something that's quite important.
And I think something that was really impressed upon me being there and taking what was for us a long drive up Etna to get there was how much of a commitment it took my family to plant and harvest those orchards. Because in my grandfather's time, when he was going, they were taking donkeys up the slopes, and it was such a long, arduous journey. They would stay there for weeks at a time, which we speak to. They would camp out there, right, to tend these fields. And I think that really drove home how tied they were to that land. Like, this was a multi-week commitment every time they went up, many times a year, obviously, to do different portions of the gardening. And so it was not like just a hobby. It wasn't like it is for us, almost like stepping out of your door and you can go do some weeding. It's like, this was the main event, and I think it just really drove home how passionate and how committed they had to be to see fruit from their labor.
And this is actually the time whenever finally, because it was not easy to find about the property, because you thought you're going to Italy and someone is going to tell you, oh, this was the house, this was the property. And I think you had to ask some relatives to really find out where the house was with the apple orchards. Yeah. And when you're finally there, that's actually where I got teary eyes, because it makes, I even if I'm not part of your family, it must have been very impactful at that point, where everything comes full circle. All the generations finally connect together, because these places that were indeed a labor of love, as you indicated, that was where people associated memories. The just being together. Yeah. It's not just about growing a tomato or a pepper or what was it, the oregano, or it was just everything that place represented the family life. So
totally. And it was both, the narrative climax of the documentary, but also the climax of our investigation. I mean, we literally went up the incline of Etna and saw this place at the top. Like, it was the mountaintop that we had been looking for. So it was very impactful, both from a storytelling perspective and from the emotional, personal perspective that my mom and I had been on this journey together and found the thing that, gave us at least some of the answers that we had been looking for. It certainly gave us the closure we were looking for on that one big question of, why does our family garden?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How, this making of this documentary was quite an undertaking, and both emotional and probably technical, and et cetera, et cetera. How has the experience of making this documentary changed or influenced, Michaela, your relationship with your mother, and Sandy, your relationship with your daughter?
Well, as my mom can attest, we've always been very close, so that was something that, there wasn't much change to that. But I think I'll speak for myself, and then maybe speak for my mom too, and she can tell me if I'm right or wrong. But I think I garnered a better understanding of why gardening is so important to my mom, and understanding that priority, and wanting to do the same. I mean, in the past, I kind of just said, I don't have a green thumb. That's just the way it's going to be. But now I want to. I'm not saying I've achieved it. I could show you plants that speak to that. But like, the desire is there, because I am so hyper aware of the continuity of that green thumb and what it means to be able to pass that down. So I think that's something that I've gained from this process. And at least I feel, being on one side of it, I feel like my mom maybe understands my filmmaking process more, whereas that's something that I kind of learned on my own. My mom being by my side as I made this documentary, I think helped her to understand what I do a little bit more. I don't know if you agree with me.
Yeah, I definitely do. I mean, it's been an amazing journey together, and as Michaela said, we've always been close. but I think this really even made us closer. And, every so often I would step back and say, oh, I never thought of it that way. Some aspect of the documentary, I had originally thought of it more from an academic perspective, and that she's infused it with humor and warmth and, just not the experts. And, if it was all by myself, we wouldn't be having this conversation, because Michaela made the documentary what it is, and I so appreciate and admire her talent as filmmaker.
And you finally build something together, especially when it's something that is going to show on Google Earth.
Yes, right. Exactly.
Well, Michaela and Sandy, this was indeed another conversation that took everyone back home to some good memories, and indeed a very nice and comfy place to be in right now. And I wish you in bocca al lupo all the best for future screening of your documentary. And at some point, can you tell us how the public will be able to access your documentary? What are the plans for Heirloom?
Sure. So right now we are in the festival. Yeah, right now we're in the festival process, which kind of prohibits us from posting online or starting to share links like that. So we'll continue to update all of our social media about our festival screenings. We have quite a few coming up in Italy. At the Ischia Film Festival, the Ischia Global Film Festival, Andaras in Sardinia. But we also have some in the U.S. coming up, so we'll continue to update our social media. So make sure you follow at Heirloom the Film on Instagram to be kept abreast of those screenings. And then hopefully we're going to have sold it soon to a platform where folks can go and screen it, like on an Amazon or a Netflix. So we will certainly, if that happens, you will all hear about it.
Thank you. And we'll keep on sharing. We'll keep on sharing the news and the dates. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Grazie mille.
Bye-bye. Okay, well, unfortunately, the hour is almost up.
Il Big Ben ha detto stop.
It's time for us to say arrivederci e alla prossima. We want to thank you all for tuning into the program. If you have any questions or comments, please contact us at the Italian Radio Hour at gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. And Viviana, who will be our guest next week?
Well, next week we will talk to Anna Harsh, an award-winning dancer, choreographer, artistic director of Allegro Dance Company in Washington, PA, and she's also the author of La Danza, Conflict, Passion, and Healing. She will talk to us about her book and how to preserve Italian traditional dances for future generations.
This should be an interesting conversation. And now, to all of the listeners, I want to remind you all that if you or any of your family or friends have missed a prior episode or would like to listen to this episode again, please visit our website at www.istitutomondoitaliano.org and click on the Italian Radio Hour tab.
Vorremmo ringraziare le nostre ospiti Rosetta Costantino, Mary Miniri, Michaela Smith, Sandy Grasso, il nostro sponsor Istituto Mondo Italiano e alla Boara per la musica. And finally, before we leave, here is the trivia question for next week. What does "sei come il prezzemolo" mean? Again, what does "sei come il prezzemolo" mean? You can send in your answers to the Italian Radio Hour at gmail.com.
And if you're not living in the Pittsburgh area or you might be out of town, remember, you can catch us streaming live at khbradio.com every Thursday at 5 p.m. And be sure to like us on Instagram and Facebook at The Italian Radio Hour. Until next time, alla prossima. Ciao.
Ci sta ceno garofula adorno e culirami con voglia la via.
The Italian Radio Hour has been sponsored by Istituto Mondo Italiano.